Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth O'Brien, Senior Director of AI Support at Intercom. I'm joined today by George Dilthey from Clay. Hey, George, how are you doing today?
Hey, Ruth, nice to see you.
For our listeners, would you be able to give a quick intro to yourself and to Clay, please?
For sure, yeah. So my name's George Dilthey. I head up the support team here at Clay. So I've been very close with the Intercom team for a while now. We're strong users and advocates of the Intercom product. And Clay is a tool that helps your company grow using a sort of combination of data enrichment and automated workflows. On the data enrichment side, we have a lot of the sort of traditional data enrichment that you might imagine, like emails and company firmographics and things like that. But we also layer on AI to help you sort of find data points that may be new or something that you may not be able to get with traditional data providers. And then we layer on this automated workflow piece to help you sort of come up with ways to grow your company at in automated, scalable ways.
Great, thank you for that. We're not allowed to have favorites, right? But I'm just going to say you are one of our favorite customers here at Intercom. They might edit this out afterwards, but I'm going to say it to you here now. And one of the reasons, for me, one of the reasons I love working with you at Clay is the innovation that you bring to the customer support space. So, can you tell us a little bit about one of those pieces of innovation that you've worked on recently, which is a career development program called The Wheel?
Yeah, so the wheel is a sort of something that came sort of naturally through the course of our sort of building the support team here. So it really starts back almost a year and a half ago now in March of 2024 when I started at Clay and took over the support team. I was having a conversation with our co-founder and head of ops, Varun, and he really kind of working with him to sort of define what we wanted out of a support team. And one of the things that we were both very sort of clear on is that we didn't want to build a sort of traditional support team where we might just grow it to be good enough and it just has to be something that is, we're just answering questions and it doesn't really matter the quality and things like that. And we really sort of leaned into this idea that support should be a value driver, should be one of the more important functions of the company. And that was the sort of team that we wanted to build. So over the course of the next year, we committed to hiring really, really just like good people onto the team and making sure that at every sort of stage of this process we were still staying committed to this idea that support was going to be kind of really fantastic. And one of the things that we started to see that happened sort of naturally is that when we were hiring these folks that were often very high slope and through the job we were training them on the product, they were also sort of communicating and working with customers sort of across the board. We were finding very quickly that these folks were able to have a ton of impact outside of the queue, in the queue for sure, but then outside of the queue as well. And so one of the things that we started doing sort of naturally is we sort of came up with this process where you would be sort of providing support and helping our customers in the queue in sort of a natural kind of support way. But there were also these sort of side projects starting to develop of ways they were able to come up with new projects or work with another team or whatever it might be. So a couple of examples of that. Tanvi, one of our product support specialists, she came up with this sort of idea of an engineering build where she was working very closely with engineers to actually use Clay and build things as customers would want. She was bringing that perspective that she was getting from the queue and helping sort of infuse that into the engineers and things like that. Another example is Bruno, who is now on our ops team, but he sort of started on the support side of things, really sort of focused on this technical opsy type way, and was able to build out just a ton of automations to help our support team sort of scale and be a little bit more efficient kind of across the board. And so at every point, pretty much everybody on the team in different ways was sort of like doing their queue work, but then also spending time outside of the queue doing these other projects. And so we sort of decided we wanted to really lean into that. And sometime in the spring or late last year, we sort of decided to kind of make this sort of a thing. We were seeing a lot of success with it. We were seeing that a lot of people on the support team were sort of able to sort of carry both of those, do both of those things. And we opted to sort of make it official. And so we sort of kicked off this program a little bit in haste. We sort of decided, we want to do this. We want to sort of turn this into a program. And we also specifically started to target new grads, right? We found that a lot of the people that were on the team even now were new grads or even early career where, maybe they had their first job at a school and it wasn't quite working, or they didn't quite like it, or, whatever it might be. And so they were able to sort of, come on and start doing, this sort of new role. And then we sort of decided to lean into that sort of other piece, right? So the sort of idea of the wheel program is that you're going to be doing support. You're going to do that for, your first 3 months as an intensive, but then after that, you move into this sort of split where some of your time, about 30% of your time, is spent rotating through different parts of the company, right? And so it's almost like a formal manifestation of what folks were already doing in the past. And what we found is that we're starting to find, again, really just like, good, new grads that are coming out of top colleges throughout the country, or coming from consulting or whatever it might be, and dropping them into this sort of net new role. So it's something we're super excited about. It's still, relatively early on. It's almost like I like to think of it an experiment. But we had our first cohort start in June, and they've really started to, the program sort of keeps them in support for a 3 month sort of immersive, and starting in September or so, we're starting to think about sort of what these rotations look like. How can they not only sort of bring the perspective of the customer to different parts of the company, but then how can they also learn, like, what is it like to sort of learn at a, or work in different parts of a high growth startup and all that kind of jazz. So it's sort of this mutually, beneficial thing that we're just like really excited about right now.
I love it. I absolutely love it. At Intercom, we've tried to do something like this over the course of the amount of time that I've been here anyway. I've been involved in various different mentorship programs for support engineers to move into engineering, or say maybe some folks to move into the customer success team. Like there's been various iterations of this that I've tried to run here at Intercom myself when I was leading our EMEA frontline team. But one thing I found was that it's really difficult to commit to something like that and still be able to keep up with your queues and your response times. And then if somebody else, say, leaves the company and you're after committing that you're going to send somebody on a tour or something like that, stuff like KPIs can start to fall apart a little bit. So can you speak a little bit about how that's working for you? And would you say that AI has actually contributed a bit to being able to actually free up more time for the team to do something like this?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, early on, that was the sort of big bet, right? I remember giving this long presentation, at one of our all hands, talking about sort of like, the future of AI and support. And the one side of that conversation can be quite daunting, right? That AI is going to sort of take all our jobs, and especially in a world like support, things are going to sort of collapse. But the way that I sort of, really think about it is, it's not necessarily that AI is going to take all our jobs and sort of cause everything to collapse. It's going to actually take away the parts of the job that we don't like doing, right? It's going to take away the sort of tedious, mundane questions that are coming to this support queue that, I don't need to tell 10 people a day how to log into Clay. Like that's something that AI should be answering. And so with that, as we sort of like are able to free up a lot of that time, we open up time for all these other things. And I think that's, again, sort of how this happened a little bit more organically, sort of, through last year, as we were seeing that we were able to sort of deflect, we're now deflecting, I think, 50% or so of our conversations, and really opening up time for this other work to happen. And again, it's sort of is the bet that we're able to make, is that we can start to sort of, make that all happen, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it's the same for us where, like I said, we were trying to do this in the past, but it always came back to the queue starting to be in a mess when we did actually
Hmm.
commit to it. But now, similar to yourselves, like we are actually seeing that we are starting to have the space and time finally, thanks to AI, because again, we're seeing about like over 75% of our workload is being taken care of by our AI
Hmm.
agents in now. And we're actually having the space and time to be able to do this. And I know that you can use AI and AI agents to just cost cut and have a smaller team, right? Some companies are choosing to do that. But I think the more innovative, like yourself, and hopefully us too here at Intercom, we're seeing that it's not, AI shouldn't be about like just cost cutting. Like, yes, for sure, it's about cost savings and not having to hire more and more people over time. But finally, you can do all these things that you've wanted to do with your support team, which is to get them involved with other teams and on different projects. Because what we've seen is that the support people who have moved on into other roles around the company have such a strong foundation from working
Mhm.
with customers that it only benefits in terms of being able to, bring that viewpoint to other teams and help them understand how our customers work more. So finally, we're being able to do this at a bit more of a, I suppose, sustainable pace, but we haven't quite gotten to your stage yet where you have like this super formalized program. So color me impressed anyway. But
Well, I don't know if I'd say super formalized, but hopefully getting there.
yeah, okay. Yeah, definitely. But I'd love to, check in with you on this in a few months' time and see how it is going. But even at the moment, can you just talk a little bit about how you think it will benefit your team specifically to do this? And then also how it's going to benefit the wider business?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I think that for our team, the benefits are almost sort of innate, right? Like we're still sort of committed to just hiring really, really good people. And I think when you're trying to provide world-class support to your customers as sort of your foundation, as sort of your basis, having really, really good people in seat is really important. But I think that the thing that we've sort of leaned into is that there's so much sort of information that you're getting from that support queue that is really hard to sort of boil down to what's important, what's just people complaining, what's noise, what's not, what's someone that says they really like something. How can we sort of take everything that's coming through on the front lines and sort of boil it down into things that are actually good signal for us and important for us. So it's something that we used to do. It was much easier when we were smaller. We would, we had all of our engineers, they would just sit in our Slack community and just listen to customers. And, as you grow and as we now have, over 10,000 customers, it becomes much harder, I think, to sort of do that at scale. And the support team really becomes those front lines. And so I think as far as sort of helping the rest of the company, it being able to sort of take that perspective and then go into product marketing or go into customer success or go into support engineering or whatever it might be to really sort of bring that perspective of like, oh, this is what customers are struggling with, and now I have this new capacity where I can help them. Maybe I can help them by just answering their question, sure, and that's really important, but also I can help them by improving the product or improving the way that we communicate around the product or whatever it might be. And so I think that you sort of get again that sort of like two part. We're helping the company, but then the support team is also learning more of what's going on around the company and bringing that back to the way that they support customers in the queue and all that. And so it just kind of sets up this almost flywheel of kind of feedback and voice of customer stuff that we're really excited about.
Yeah, and you mentioned already, the kind of rotational system with it, but how are you finding it's going to affect, or already has affected your ability to retain folks?
Mhm.
Because one thing we found is, and it's a good thing, right, that on our team we have such amazing people, and the rest of the company wants to take them from us, so that
Mhm.
because of all the experience they have with customers, and we don't get them back, right? So when they're gone,
Yeah.
we have to go through the whole process of like hiring again, training people up again. So how is that going for you?
Yeah, that's something that I've been struggling is maybe a strong word, but working through for a long time now. I remember having a conversation with Declan and your VP of support, and I told him that like we have this new role. It's a support engineer, and I'm really excited about it because it gives us the sort of resources of an engineer that can help. And he said, "Yeah, I've tried that like 4 or 5 times, but they always just fall into the engineering org, and then we lose them, and that's the end of it." And so for a while he's been sort of preparing me to sort of fight those battles. But I think the thing that I've sort of become really excited about is we're actually you know part of that is challenging, right? It's difficult when our response times are maybe struggling, and then we're also losing headcount to the solutions team or to the ops team or whatever it might be. But I actually have started to sort of reframe that as a competitive advantage, right? We're able to sort of almost train up these really, like you said, giving them the foundation of support really makes them these kind of expert generalist type folks that when they go into solutions, they're going to be much better at solutions because of the work that they've done in support. And I think what we're sort of finding on the same side is that we're actually finding it easier to sort of hire this new grad talent. I think that there's a lot of I was just reading a New York Times article about how new grads, especially in computer science, are struggling to find jobs, and companies are just much less willing to hire junior engineers because there's a lot of that work that can be done by AI now, and we're already starting to see some of those effects, and we're almost capitalizing on that. and being able to sort of like pull this really, from this really good talent pool and bring them into this sort of net new role, and then sort of build the foundation. And I think that, the other kind of fun additive there is that when you're hiring sort of these new grad, types of people, they're coming in with their own perspectives, with brand new perspectives about how things should be done, and how, there's obviously advantages to hiring a seasoned support person to come in and sort of, do support. But when you hire a new grads who have no idea what it's like to work at a startup, or work, at all, they're bringing in a lot of perspectives that we've never even seen before. And then being able to sort of like send them throughout the company, I think is something that we're really trying to just take advantage of. And so one of the conversations that we're having actively is, how can we just sort of like keep this backfill of, new grad talent coming into support, with the assumption that they're probably going to get dragged into other teams very quickly, and trying to sort of make that an advantage rather than something that I'm sort of fighting against, which is really fun.
Yeah, it's a balance, isn't it? Because you do spend all this time training people up and getting them the product knowledge that they need, and they're working with customers. And if they are leaving the team really quickly, you have to just do it all over again. So it sounds like you're trying to figure out a way of like putting the positive spin on that, and making sure that like you're not constantly fighting this battle of having to hire, but they're doing kind of a bit of a split, so you have enough people to actually answer customers still.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Um, the next question I would love to ask you about is buy-in from your leadership team. Interesting, discussion that I think all support people end up having, either with their finance team or senior leadership, around headcount, especially in the world of AI, where you can see that, a lot of stuff is starting to be resolved by AI agents. You're fighting to keep your headcount so that you can do stuff like this. Can you talk a little bit about the business case you put together for this program so that you could actually keep your headcount rather than reducing it? I'd love to hear more about that.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a conversation that I think probably every, support leader is having at this point, of how do I sort of, fight for that head count when there's, a world of AI sort of coming in. I think that the way that I was able to sort of sell it, and it's still sort of an active conversation, right? It's not like we've sort of, that's it. We got the buy-in and we're off to the races. I think that, a lot of the way that we were able to sell this is sort of what we were just talking about, of like, I've gone to them and basically said, like, this is a competitive advantage to us. We can actually have really talented folks spread throughout the entire company and doing things throughout the entire company at a really high quality way, right? This is not just a sort of like, a cost that we're putting on the company to train new grads and sort of, help them figure it out. It's really an advantage to have these folks coming in. And I think we've just seen so many successes at this point. I think 4 or 5 folks, even at this point where we're, a relatively young company, and even more young support organization, we've been able to sort of show that there are really talented people now that are coming up through support and then going into these other roles and doing really good things. So Tanvi, who I mentioned earlier, is now one of our product marketers. Bruno is now full time on our ops team, and it's just we're able to sort of like almost show the finance team and show leadership, like, hey, this is working. We need to do more of this and not less of this. I think the other thing is, we have the advantage of being a startup that's growing really, really fast. But one of the sort of bottlenecks that we're, actively running into, as I'm sure a lot of, companies do at our stage, is recruiting. How can we make sure that we are, bringing in good talent, the right talent, across the entire company? And if I can make the case that this actually becomes a little bit of a recruiting pipeline, and we can actually hire at scale. The last wheel program we ran, we hired 7 full-time employees off of it. And, it took us probably about the same amount of time as, obviously a little bit more work here and there, but about the same amount of time as one sort of full-time employee kind of hiring cycle. So there's a lot of different places where the advantage comes. And I think making a big deal of those, and sort of talking about those, is really important. But like any other support leader, I'm going to be actively having those conversations, I think, probably for, the majority of my career, of how do I make the case that we, get more headcount and things like that. So the more that we can sort of show the successes, I think that the better, the easier it is for us.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it's not necessarily a super short result game. People's career and spending time moving on to other teams and having a big impact there as well. That does take time. It doesn't happen in like a matter of 2 weeks. Like they might do some really cool things in 2 weeks, right? But building up the case that over time numerous people move out of support and into other roles around the company, and then they turn out to be the top performers on those teams. That's
Hmm.
the kind of reputation that you need to start building up, I think, to be able to have those kind of conversations around, we got to keep doing this. And I actually
Right.
had a great example of this a couple of weeks ago. I could hear the sales bell ringing on the floor in our office in Dublin, and one of the guys who used to be on the support team when I was leading the EMEA group was after closing an absolutely massive deal, and then it was up in our all hands as like one of the biggest deals we've ever done. And I was just so proud to see that it was a support person who moved on to another team, who uses the skills, the foundational skills that they gained in support to now go on to be one of our bigger sellers, and doing so much great work for the company. And I was like, okay, there's the financial proof.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But you need to have
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
happening over and over again over time to be able to keep justifying it.
Right, exactly. And I think the other thing is that it's almost a sort of mindset shift. I've been having this conversation a lot with with my boss, our head of CX, who's sort of been having a lot of these conversations with me. And I think, on the one hand, I've sort of been of the mindset that like, oh, this is the battle that I'm going to start having with the finance team. It's how can I fight for headcount? This is just how it goes. But on the other hand, I've been working with her to sort of like shift that mindset a little bit too, and sort of say like, we're all here to sort of grow the company, right? And when we think about retention, sure, we can think about it of like, how can I retain people on the support team? But we can also think about it of how can we make sure that we're retaining across the entire company, right? And so I think more of someone who is getting pulled into another team, something that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sure, it means that I have to sort of backfill that and kind of keep that sort of recruiting engine going. But I think that if it's the better thing for the company, then it's the better thing that we should. Then it's the thing that we should do. And so trying to sort of change the and the finance team is thinking similarly, right? They're not sort of like saying no more headcount, no more headcount. They're seeing that this is something that's advantageous for the company, and if I can save the solutions team having to hire for a headcount, that's a much easier story to tell. And so I think obviously it gets a little bit easier as you get to show these stories, but also it's sort of a mindset of that we're not here to sort of duke it out. We're here to sort of grow the company as quickly as we can, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it keeps coming back to that saying of support as a cost center versus
Hmm.
support as a value driver for the rest of the business. And I love that more and more companies now, like yours and Intercom as well, are starting to flip that narrative of support as is a cost, support as a cost. It can actually be such a long-term value add, no matter what happens with it, whether it's people going to other roles or a customer's impression of how you help them over time with your support team. And I think I've discussed this with you before, that our team are starting to do things kind of more into the customer success world as well, around helping customers with their retention and overall usage, rather than just the like answer the question and move on to the next thing. So over time, again, that's going to blossom more and more into support as a value driver and not just a cost center, just a cost center.
Right,
Final question
right.
for you. Um, how what advice would you give other companies or other support leaders who are trying to get something like this started, or maybe they haven't even thought about it yet? What would you say to them to start doing now to build towards something like the wheel for their own business?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think, again, part of this whole thing just sort of happened naturally. It was just what was happening with our support team. And so I think, the first piece of advice is just sort of like look at what's already happening. I think that we're probably not the only company where, your support team maybe, have some extra time because AI is doing more work or whatever it might be. And start to think about where there's already opportunity where they can jump into other things. Maybe that's with the product team to sort of help with that product feedback loop, which is just sort of we see that as like a core part of this role. But I think that the other thing is that like we started really scrappy, and I think that a lot of the times from the outside looking in, even you mentioned like this is sort of this formal program, but like I just had a conversation with our current cohort of what we're calling them wheelies, and they were all sort of asking like what's happening with these rotations, what's going on with this. This is something that we've done the 3 months, or we're about to finish up our 3 months of support support? How do these rotations go? And I basically said to them, like, I don't know yet. We're sort of figuring that out. Like we have a month of time, and we're going to start working with other departments and figure out what rotations might look like. And you guys are going to sort of come up with some ideas. And it's sort of this experimental thing. And so I think that, I think a lot of people might assume that like this is a whole big formal program that we've been able to sort of do, where on the, in the background, it's really this sort of scrappy thing. I remember when we first decided to announce it, I spent basically a weekend drawing up like what the idea was of like, we were basically going to hire, 5, 6 people off of this thing. And that was sort of the goal. And the next week there was a hiring fair at NYU, and I basically took one of our recruiters, Joanne, who was helping me with this, and said, let's just go to the hiring fair and see what happens. And we basically just like we grabbed a tablecloth out of the closet, and we got like a clay sign that we just sort of picked up out of the closet, and we just like got in an Uber and we went to NYU, and we found that we were like the only tech company there. It was this moment where I was like, oh my God, there's something here. There's like tech hasn't quite figured out that there's this untapped resource of new grads, and we did that in a matter of like there wasn't a lot of planning to do it. And so I think that a lot of the times there's a lot of sort of like, how can I build out this program, and how can I think through the whole thing, and how can I make sure it works? But a lot of the times it's just like start doing it, and it sort of becomes a thing over time. And we're just really much how we run, I think, a lot of this company. We're trying things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and sort of just like rapidly iterating on it. We're even now moving into a world where maybe we just have this like, what if we had a cohort start every month? What if we had a cohort start 9 times a year? How can we sort of like make this a little bit more of an engine that's sort of rolling? And all of that is just sort of like, what's the next thing that we have to do? And then we just do it and keep going. So I think, the whole, we always like to say, that we're working in a really scrappy way, and sort of just getting things going as we can.
Yeah, one of the principles that I've always worked with at Intercom, I think it was one of our engineering principles at some point. If sorry, engineering team, it might still be one of the principles. I'm on the support team. Is to think big. Think big, but start small. And
Hmm.
again, always since I've worked at Intercom, it's also stay scrappy. Come up with
Hmm.
experiments, run with them, see if there's something that you can formalize or if they're a once off. And like you said, in the staying scrappy space, you might build this out to be super formalized in a certain way for 6 months to a year, and then in a year's time the landscape has shifted and you might need to change it up or do something differently again.
Hmm.
So it's also that idea, I think, of not being too rigid in like, I built this thing and I have it so perfect right now, in a time where maybe it actually does need to change up again at a later stage.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We like to say here across the whole company is make it good and then make it great. So I think we're definitely on the make it good stage, and maybe we'll be there for the next 6 months or a year, or maybe it'll always be there. But we're constantly working to make it great, which is very exciting.
George, thank you so much for talking to us about the wheel. It was great to hear all about it today. And we can share some resources as part of the podcast when we have it up on YouTube and on Spotify, and link to the wheel page so that folks can see it for themselves.
Amazing. Yeah, look, I really appreciate the time, and thanks for having me.